This morning's session is on economic development, and we've got 3 different presenters this morning, and I'll be reading their bios, and then they'll go into their presentations. There'll be time at the end for some questions. There's one mic here, so if I could ask you at the end, if you have a question, please come up to the mic and say who you are, where you're from, and who your question is for. We're going to wind up right around 10 o'clock. It might be a little before, but hopefully not very much after. So with that, I'll get started. Our first presenter this morning is Vittus Qujaukitsoq. He is the Minister of Finance and Domestic Affairs for the government of Greenland. He was educated as a translator and interpreter in Trade and Business School in Nuuk in 1993. He's held many positions, including interpreter at the Greenland Home Rule in 1994. He also became the organization secretary of Siumut in 1997, and in 1997 he became the head of the Secretariat of Trade and Industrial Council of Sisimiut. Later that year, he became the private assistant for the Minister of Social Affairs, Labor and Public Works. From 2000 and 2001, he was the private assistant for the Minister of Fisheries, Hunting, Agriculture and Industry. He later became the corporate secretary of Royal Greenland AS, I'm not sure what that acronym is for, but I'm sure he does, and then corporate secretary and the communication officer of, excuse my mispronunciation here, as Vittus said, his Inuktitut is better than my Kalaallit. Where is it here? Nukisiofit. In 2013, he became the Minister of Finance and Domestic Affairs. His organizational work includes chairman of youth organization in Kana from 1990-91, then chairman of the Siumut Youth in Nuuk from 1991 to 1992. He also acted as the secretary of Siumut Youth, vice president of the Youth Council, Sokolak, and then a year later became president of the Youth Council, Sokolak. From 2006 on, he was the vice chair of the Sisimiut Taekwondo Club, and then became the organizational vice chair of Siumut in 2011. He was organizer, rapporteur, and coordinator of various general meetings, seminars, and elections for the Siumut Party from 1994 to 2012. He's married with Nalia Qujaukitsoq on November 2011 and has 1 adult daughter. So if he's got the president of the Taekwondo Club, we're going to have a hard time tackling him down if he's going along. So hopefully that doesn't happen. Please welcome Mr. Vittus Qujaukitsoq.
Thank you for welcoming me to this conference. It is a pleasure for me to present Greenland and the government of Greenland, and it is our desire to have a closer link with our kindred neighbor Nunavut and Canada. Let's take a look at how we have survived for the past few thousand years and the reason why we are here in the Arctic. Our ability to travel and to hunt has been the skills that has brought us food and the ability to travel across the icy and harsh environment of Arctic. We've had the ability of sewing clothes to accommodate the winter and the darkness. One of the reasons why we have survived has been the ingenious skills of our ancestors who have been able to survive for thousands of years. Let me give you a clue of how ingenious our ancestors have been of using resources that we think would be impossible. But for over 2,000 years, we have been able to utilize mineral resources such as iron that has given us tools to hunt. These are the samples of artifacts seized around 1641 from Greenland. The point of the harpoon comes from Fishery, and our ancestors have been able to utilize iron for over 2,000 years. And the iron has been traded between Inuit across the entire Arctic. That's how ingenious our ancestors have been. The tools to cut iron and the deposit where it lies have been their knowledge for hundreds of years. The harpoon points comes from a small place not far from my home area called Qujaukitsoq, the place of iron deposit. Just to give you a brief historic look of why we are here. Greenland is a large island, the largest island with more than 2 million square kilometers, with approximately 74 settlements across Greenland. And we are only 56,000 people living, and we've had home rule since 1979, and we enhanced our rule by introducing self-rule in 2009. We are part of the Danish realm with an autonomous rule. We have responsibility of administration and of all natural resources in Greenland. We have many opportunities in Greenland. Our current situation is that part of the foreign policy and the national security are still under the Danish government, but we are gaining more self-government through the act that was introduced in 2009. If we look at the financial situation today, I'm not sure why the bullets won't come. Well, the economic situation is that we have a balance of our income and expenditures today, and we are about to introduce some heavy social reforms and to make our administration more effective. We are on verge of change. Okay, sorry for keeping you wait for the bullet points. If we look at our business opportunities, we mainly live by the fishing resources. That is our traditional industry. We have to make a better utilization of our fishing stocks. We have oil and minerals that will become the new industry. We also have tourism and trade. If we look at the economic situation, we have less decline in our economic growth, with almost zero or low growth. We have possibility of greater oil exploration in the coming years. If we look at the fishery, our activities are very concerned of the total allowable catch of shrimp, and the prices have been good in recent years. We are fishing cod, herring, and mackerel, but the quotas of shrimps are likely to decline, so that it will affect our economy. So we need to find other means for our income. We have a growing part of elderly population in Greenland, as for many other nations. So that's one of the reasons we need to introduce social reforms. The last figure is to show you that if we are not doing anything to cut our expenditures, then our incomes will be lower than our expenditures. So there is a need for a social reform in order to keep the welfare system we have. We also need to modernize our public sector by cutting our expenditure and make our administration more efficient, and improving our budget planning, and increase digitalization and improve procurement policy. And we need to educate our young people and introduce sustainable use of natural resources, which has been the main reason why we have maintained the use of our resources. We also need improved interaction between social security benefits and workforce participation. Looking at the future, we need to raise the level of education. That is the biggest challenge for us at the moment, and also to capitalize on the exploration of oil and gas in Greenland. Looking at the oil and mineral resources, there are two scenarios that the government sees. The first is, of course, that oil and gas will provide a comfort that would be a sleeping pillow if we are not improving the education and to ensure low cost. If we are not improving the level of education, we would end what we call jaws of death. So these are the scenarios that we have. Either way, we need to develop in order to lift our educational level. If we ain't doing anything, we could easily end up as Greece or aspire to use the Norwegian experience more. So there is no option except to develop Greenland to accommodate the future needs. There is a danger of decrease of our welfare, so we need to keep the necessary reforms and to increase employment of the private sector. And we also need to include the settlements we have and to increase employment and to enhance our sovereignty. We need to keep balance of our public finances, and that the income we would get from oil and mining should accommodate our fund to absorb more exploration and safety for the future generations. And we also need to increase our population. Our business opportunities are, as I said, in these sectors. And our income looks for the fishery. But what we are not using is the waste materials from the fish industry that we need to generate more income. And we need to generate more revenue from the fishing stocks that we are using today. There is the decline of the stocks, and we also have a growing tax income from the halibut resources. We are gaining experience from Iceland and the neighboring countries like Norway and Faroe Islands, and it allows us to put a heavy taxation of the fishing stocks. The oil and minerals are an opportunity for us to generate new income, and there's an urge to create new possibilities for that reason. But the climate changes also present some new opportunities for Greenland as well. Since the ice is declining in the Arctic, then it makes it more possible to travel in Arctic. The oil exploration has been ongoing and ever increasing in Greenland, and we expect a further development. If we look at the most prominent projects, we have lead and zinc deposits everywhere, iron deposits and rare earth elements across South Greenland and West Greenland. We also have tourism and trade across the entire Greenland, but we need to introduce connections between Greenland and Canada. And we also need to get further connection to North America in order to improve the travel opportunities to Greenland. Currently, there are no shipping routes between Greenland and Canada directly. It has to go through Iceland, so we are a small market with increased mining and exploration activities. But we are also in a very fortunate position that we are in between Europe and North America geographically, so it would be a good opportunity for Greenland to use this geo position that we have. I think I'm running out of time, so if you have questions, I would be delighted to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Vittus. So it comes from where the iron comes from in Greenland, and with the Taekwondo, maybe he is the Inuit Iron Man and he can save Greenland from the jaws of death. In my haste to begin, I neglected to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Victor Tutu. I'm a CGA and the president of Outlook Consulting. Our firm is moderating all of the conference sessions here at Northern Lights 2014. Our next speaker is Glenn Cousins. He's the manager of business services for Kakivak Association. The Kakivak Association is a nonprofit organization focused on developing economic opportunities for Inuit. He's a member of the Nunavut Economic Forum Board of Directors and was the executive director during its formative years. Prior to that, he had a 20-year career in business management in the North, Originally from northern BC, he first arrived in the eastern Arctic in, pardon me, 27 years ago, I guess, hey? 1986, 28. Yeah, and has lived and visited a number of communities in both Nunavut and Nunavik. Glenn is married with 4 children and volunteers his time with Habitat for Humanity in Rivalry. Please welcome Glenn Cousins.
Good morning, everyone. So, as Victor mentioned, I am the manager of business services for Kakivak Association and do volunteer on the board of the Nunavut Economic Forum. And you may wonder why I'm making this presentation on behalf of the forum this morning. And the simple answer to that is I missed the board meeting where they decided who was going to make the presentation. So don't miss board meetings. Before I begin on the presentation, I just want to point out in the group, in the crowd here, Terry Forth is sitting up front, and Terry Forth is currently the Executive Director of the Nunavut Economic Forum. And beside him is Graham Clinton, who's been involved with the forum for quite a number of years. So the Nunavut Economic Forum is, I guess what I'm going to talk about before I go into that is, the point of this presentation is to talk about the Nunavut Economic Forum and the Nunavut Economic Development Strategy and Nunavut's approach to high-level planning for economic development. So that's what we're talking about. The forum is a group of member organizations brought together to share information and basically collaborate on this planning process for the Nunavut Economic Development Strategy. The forum was originally established in 1998 and was formalized in 2004. The Secretariat is supported by the territorial government, Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated, and currently Cannor, but when it was set up, it was INAC at the time. Try to keep up with myself. There are about 30 member organizations in the NEF, and that's pretty broad representation of economic development organizations in the territory. Some of them are represented in this room. In fact, looking around, I know there are a number of people in here that have been involved with the NEF over the years. I'll display the full list of members at the end of the presentation, but basically it includes Inuit for-profit and non-profit organizations and corporations, territorial and federal governments, sector development organizations such as Nunavut Tourism, the Nunavut Offshore Allocations Group, Nunavut Arts and Crafts Association, and so on. And of course, there are other agencies such as Kakivak Association with specific economic development roles. So now you've read the slide, which is great. So there are a number of roles that have been assigned to the forum, but basically those can be summed up into saying this group of people or organizations is getting together to collaborate and coordinate economic development activity through the strategy. You all did read the slide, right? So Nunavut's approach to planning. A 10-year strategy, which was launched in 2003, and as you can figure out now, it's sort of has come to an end. The strategy was subtitled "Building a Foundation for Our Future," and really set the stage to make some choices, some actions, some investments in some of the foundations for Nunavut's development going forward. The strategy functions as our guide for economic development, It defines our objectives and what we will do and who will do it, really, to achieve these broad objectives. And it also guides how the NEF members interact as part of a system to support development. As you can imagine, with 30 plus organizations with maybe not competing agendas, but their own specific operational objectives and so on, to bring all those different focuses, agendas, objectives together under one collective effort is certainly challenging and quite a unique approach. The objective, as stated in the strategy, is to achieve a high and sustainable quality of life for Nunavut. The objective is not simply to grow the economy, but to ensure that growth and development are enabled and that Nunavut are prepared to benefit from the economic growth. The strategy is organized in a couple of different ways, the way it's laid out in the document. But basically it's organized under 4 themes: the land, our people, community economies, and the territorial economy. And under each of these themes there are a number of sub-themes or strategic priority areas, such as maintaining the mixed economy, so a mix of sort of traditional economy and how that's emerging to a modern economy, education and training, infrastructure development, community and organizational capacity, sector development, business development, and opportunities for youth. And of course, as probably most people know, Nunavut's population is a very young population, so creating opportunities for youth and a plan for going forward is very, very important. So the key sectors for development as identified in the strategy: resource development, commercial fisheries development, tourism, cultural industries, and again, the traditional and mixed economy. An essential, I guess the other thing I should mention is that, which I don't have a slide for, but the strategy also refers to development of 4 forms of capital: physical capital, such as infrastructure and so on; natural capital, the use of our natural wealth; social capital or organizational capital; and human capital. And of course, development of human capital is a key component to the strategy and a key requirement to realize the true development potential of Nunavut and to ensure the Nunavut are benefiting fully from economic growth and activity as it occurs. So education, training, and even well-being are significant components of the strategy. This is one of my favorite topics, I guess, in relation to the strategy, as it became a guide for investment planning. When the first round of federal program known as SINED, the Strategic Investments in Northern Economic Development program, that came out in 2004. And right around that time, the strategy had been released, and there had been some consultation and discussion about how the investments under SINED might be appropriately targeted. And so through this process, we were able to directly link the investment plan for SINED with the implementation of the strategy. And then a few years later, when the first round of SINED was we could sort of see coming that it was going to expire, there was a bit of an advocacy effort by NEF to talk about this to go to the federal government, and I see Patrick is sitting up here. He was with Northern at the time, and we went and spoke to Patrick and others and said, you know, this is a really good thing that's happening here, and we need that to continue. And then the investment planning process also continued, again, linked directly with the strategy. Over about 10 years, the federal investments linked to the strategy have totaled about $55 million. And with an estimate, I've been told, with the GN investments linked to that and other investment dollars, the total investment has been around $100 million over 10 years. So it's a good way to harmonize SciNet and GN, Government of Nunavut, and other investments to focus on the development of certain areas such as commercial fisheries, say fish stock assessments that have led to larger quotas, as an example, geoscience work, work in tourism development, work in branding for arts and crafts, and so on. I got about 4 minutes now, I guess. One of the things that we have struggled with over the years, I guess not really struggled, but been challenged with to some extent, is about how do we measure progress? How do we determine that this strategy is doing what it's intended to do? As I mentioned, 30 organizations, that's complex, and the strategy contains about 170 action items and recommendations. So how do you coordinate that, and how do you measure the inputs, outputs, and most importantly, the outcomes of our efforts? So there has been some efforts to kind of pull together all the specific activities, which is important, but over time what we've done is we've linked the measuring, we use as a measuring stick, I guess, the Nunavut Economic Outlook series to help us more appropriately measure the outcomes. And one of the things that we've learned is it takes a very long time to sort of measure this process and progress. I mentioned Graham Clinton is here, and he'll be presenting on the Outlook this afternoon at 2 o'clock, the most recent one, not the 2008 one here in the picture, but the 2013 Nunavut Economic Outlook. Okay, so 2003, 2013, obviously that's it's over. And so there is a process now to assess and renew the strategy, Nunavut Economic Development Strategy, which some people call NEDS. I don't like that term myself. It sounds like some kind of a sinus problem. But anyway, NEDS 2 is coming out sometime, perhaps early 2015. There's been a lot of work done to, again, assess and measure progress with the implementation of the strategy, and to think about what the next strategy needs to look like, where it needs to focus. And so this has included a series of roundtable discussions and other research. And as I mentioned earlier, I thought I would put up the full list of NEF members, which you probably, well, it's not too bad up on the big screen, I guess, to see that. So I could leave that up for a moment if you want to look that over. And while you're looking that over, I'll also mention that Terry Forth, the Executive Director, will be at a booth at the show for a couple of days. And if you need to talk to someone or would like to talk to someone about this whole process and get some more information, Terry will be available. Booth 319. So thank you.
Pardon me. Thank you for that presentation, Glenn. And a couple of interesting things I took out of there. The implementation measurement, I think everybody is familiar with the phrase, you achieve what you measure. And I think it's very important that there are measurements of how well the strategy is being implemented, as it's in its second version now. and build on that information and momentum that you've gained through the first strategy in the development and implementation of the second strategy. Then I noticed there's a lot of similarities in the economic outlook from Greenland and Nunavut, and I'm sure that we'll see some as well from our next presenter, who is Mr. Craig Ennis. He's the Honorary Consul of Finland for Newfoundland and Labrador. I don't know if you got to celebrate when World Juniors were won by the Finns or not, but it was pretty exciting hockey. Craig is a communications professional with experience in the private and public sector. He was recently appointed Honorary Consul of the Republic of Finland in Newfoundland and Labrador. Honorary consuls monitor the rights of Finns and permanent residents of Finland and promote economic and cultural relations between the countries. He's a director with the St. John's Board of Trade, and this is what he should really print on his business cards. He's the Dean of Awesome, St. John's. It's an organization that provides monthly $1,000 grants to local people and organizations doing awesome things in the city. Craig has business interests in professional services and in subcontracting construction. His public policy interests include standard of living, northern development, transportation planning, and fiscal policy. He holds a degree in public relations from Mount St. Vincent University and an MBA from Memorial University. Please welcome Craig Ennis.
Twice, third time's a charm. I'm sure I'll hit that microphone again a few times, I suspect. First of all, thanks. I just want to thank the organizers for putting this together and for getting such a large and diverse group in the room and in the rooms around. And also for giving me an opportunity to speak to you for a few minutes. My basic objective today is to give you a sense of what Finland is doing in terms of economic development, in terms of its Arctic strategy. I'll walk through a couple of the strategies, give you enough information to work with, and then send you off to the embassy where the real experts can help you out. So just to get a perspective on the country itself, there are some similarities between Finland and Canada that go beyond hockey, and my wife is a huge hockey fan, so there was muted congratulations for the Finnish team winning the World Juniors in my household in January. Nearly 1/3 of all people living north of the 60th parallel are Finns, so in terms of proportion in the north there's a high proportion of the population. Helsinki itself, the capital, is fairly urban with 1.25 million people living in that metro area, so there is a high concentration there. You can see across the country it's not quite as high of a concentration. I think we saw yesterday when the ambassadors were speaking about the Arctic Business Council that there is a Finnish commitment to working multilaterally with different countries and also with the business communities in different countries. This is just to give you a sense of where Finland sits on some key economic indicators and some key lifestyle indicators. It's near the top in a lot of areas, but you'll see other Scandinavian countries as well near the top in some of these indicators. The political climate, just to give you a sense of what's happening there, there's a president, and the president's generally responsible for foreign relations and for defense. The prime minister is the leader of the is basically domestic affairs. There was a constitutional rewrite in 2000. 2000 wasn't that long ago. You think that Finland's an established country with a long history, but there's still evolution, there's still change. Since about 1980, the trend has been for coalition governments, which is interesting in the context of there are different parties working together to run a country on a consistent basis, and particularly with Sweden as a neighbor, Norway, Russia, it's a cooperative government in a very competitive environment when competing for talent, for investment, for projects. And one thing to keep in mind here is there's basically a policy arrangement that touches most of the people in Finland, where the trade unions, employers associations, and the government basically have a group that come together and set a lot of the parameters around salaries, taxation, pension, unemployment benefits. So it's very collective between if you take the three stakeholder groups of government, business, and employees, it's a very collective way of dealing with some issues. There's not really much of a provincial system. Most decisions are either national or municipal, and if you look at 2/3 of taxation going to municipal, there's obviously a very strong sense of local government. There are some regional agencies that take care of law enforcement, judicial issues, occupational health and safety. So there is some of that regional cooperation, but mostly it's the national level of government and the municipal level of government. And again, those are some of the things that came out of the constitutional rewrites in 2000. Two strategies that I'll walk you through in the next few minutes are actually both less than 6 months old. So these are fairly recent, and we can rely on them for the next few years going forward. For that being indicating the policy of Finland. One is the government report on the future, taking through the next 15 years or so, and what some of the issues are going to be there. And then a revamp an update from the 2010 Arctic strategy for the country that looks at it in a little bit more holistic manner. The previous strategy focused on external relations. This brings more of a domestic piece into it. The Arctic vision, there's a couple of words that are highlighted there. Those are my emphasis. That's not something that came from any of the documentation. But if we just look at a couple of the keywords there, active, reconciling limitations, sustainable, and then cooperation, it gives you a true sense of where policy decisions will be made, of how the government will act with the other actors, whether it's domestic or international. If you check out focus.finland.fi, there's ongoing updates that touch on a number of these topics. The policy pillars, they recognize that it's an Arctic country, they have Arctic expertise, sustainable development is very much a key pillar in all policy decisions, and international cooperation, just because of trade relationships, because of proximity to other countries that they have to deal with, those are going to be key things. In reading some of the pieces coming from government, some of these strategies, there's a definitive bias toward action. And there's a sense that the future is not guaranteed, even if there is a history of working together, or groups within the country, of working with other countries. But they're not taking their long run of prosperity for granted. They want to, there's a quote here on my screen, not on yours. We can't copy the required solutions from elsewhere. We have to find novel, original solutions. So there is that sense of not resting on their laurels, making sure that they're very active in terms of controlling their own future economically. I just want to touch on the local residents, the local indigenous community, the Sami. They're the only indigenous people in the EU, and in context, there are about 6,000 to 10,000 within the country. Interestingly enough, they're very much attached. They're in Lapland, which is in the northern part of the country, and in Norway and Sweden, you'll see them move down toward the more urban centers a little bit more. Whereas in Finland, it's a bit different. They have a tendency to stay closer to their historical and traditional home further up in the north. So it's just an interesting point to understand that their attachment to the high north. There are 25 universities of applied science in Finland, so very much focused on technology, science, those types of things. Aalto University was formed in 2010, so very recently as a merger of the Helsinki School of Economics, the School of Art and Design, and the University of Technology. The University of Helsinki, which is the large university, has 35,000 students. It's got about 5,000 researchers and teachers across 4 campuses, so it's a substantially sized university in the country. In terms of research, there's a company out of Shenzhen, China. I'll probably butcher the saying of the name, Huai. It's got about 70,000 people in R&D. It has 13 sites across Europe, and their relationship with the Finnish government is quite strong to the point where it's considered to be a Finnish company. So they would have direct contact with universities and research institutes. They would be treated in terms of tax fiscal policy as a Finnish company. Terrible. In terms of the economy, there's a clear public role. It's to put in place an environment to have the private sector thrive and succeed. The Finnish Investment Corporation, they've recently done some studying, just basically saying they've evaluated themselves and have basically said they could be utilized a bit more effectively. So for those of you who are in financial services, investment professionals, there might be some opportunities for making some matches in terms of how to improve on the investment climate in the country. The economy now, this slide will show 2 things. One, I'm terrible at taking pictures from the internet and putting them into PowerPoint slides. And 2, with the exception of the European Union kind of falling off a few years ago, generally you're going to see GDP growth in the country. The economy is in fairly good shape. This is the future, of course, of the Finnish economy. At this point, I'm at about 9.5, 10 minutes according to my screen. This is the point where everybody's going to tune out, everybody's going to check their phones, because Google had put about 350 million euro into basically what equates to a server farm in Finland because it's cold. And their servers run more efficiently. They have to spend less money and less time and effort to cool down their servers in cold environments, and they are putting another 450 million euro into it. And at $800 million for people who are involved in economic development here in the territories in Labrador, if someone was talking about an 800 million euro investment in my community, I would absolutely tune myself out. It's an excellent opportunity just by virtue of having an environment that's been given to you. Very different perspective that Google is looking at. Russia's biggest search engine is going to build a data center. They've actually started in summer of last year. And Microsoft is putting 200 million euros into it as well. So very interesting opportunity based on the environment provided. So here's what you're looking for. This is the answer to the question of why have you been listening to me for the past 10 or so minutes. There are some distinct upcoming opportunities some people in the room might be interested in. Power lines, very unforgiving environment sometimes with some dense populations and then some rural areas. Transport and port facilities are going to need upgrades. I'll give you an example of the mining projects as of 2012 which are going on. There's over 50 active mines and current projects. 22 mines in precious metals, 12 in base metals, 4 in diamonds, which is kind of nice, and 13 in other commodities. To get a sense of the infrastructure and the transportation, there's a gentleman yesterday, and I'd have to go back with the notes, but he was basically saying there's a couple of $1 billion a day moving from China, and by 2020 they suspect that about 20% of what's moving out of China will be going through the northern part, shipped through the northern part of the world. So if you rough out the numbers, it's almost $150 billion a year moving through the Arctic just from one country. So the idea of having transportation infrastructure planning happening is very much needed. Environmentally, there's a Cleantech Finland project that's going on. Again, the Chinese connection, they're actually trying to help Beijing with its air pollution issues. And in terms of water treatment, they've got 250 companies and research institutes that are looking at ways of improving wastewater and water treatment programs. So the pioneering, they very much want to be a pioneer in the clean tech industry. Just on international cooperation, there's a large, and I'll butcher the term, archipelago. There's a lot of islands around. And so that means there's a lot of lighthouses around. And in fact, one sits on the border with Sweden to the point where their international cooperation, they just drew a little line on the border to make sure that the border wasn't running straight through the lighthouse. It could just be tucked in there. I'm getting the 1 minute signal, and international rivalry. There's two countries, Canada and Finland, that are in medium blue. This is a map of the most popular sports in the world. We're the only two with ice hockey being the most popular sports in the world, so there's a little bit of international rivalry there. Green, I'm suspecting, is soccer. And if you'd like to contact the embassy, the ambassador is Charles Murdo. There's an email there, embassy@finland.ca, and they'll farm out any of your questions, concerns, queries to the appropriate people. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, getting back to hockey, all right. My favorite, I gotta say, just a big plug here. My favorite non-Canadian hockey player is Pekka Rinne, and he's from Finland. I met him a few times. A very nice guy, good goalie. A lot of similarities between, as you can see, Greenland, Nunavut, and Finland. Some of the things that I pulled out of the information that we had so far. Tourism, mining, power issues. A lot of them deal with fisheries as a majority of the economy. We do have some time now for a few questions for anybody that is interested. There is a mic up at the front here. If I could ask that you come up to the mic, introduce yourself and where you're from, and say who your question is for. We've got a few minutes here at the end. I know nobody ever wants to be first to ask the question, so I did have a question for Vittus about the in 2010 and 2011, I believe it was, there was an economic growth spike in Greenland, and I'm not sure exactly if you have the information on why or what was the cause of those spikes. I saw a big difference between those 2 years and the rest of them.
It was due to the oil exploration income that came after 4 drillings on the west coast of Greenland that generated up to 80 million Canadian dollars in extra tax income.
Okay, thanks for that. So similar to Nunavut, I guess, individual projects can have a huge impact on the GDP for Greenland. Thank you. Did you have a question?
I do, thank you. My name is Sheila Downer. I'm with consulting, Labrador Consulting, but my background has been in regional development, economic development in Labrador, and I've worked with businesses and municipalities there throughout the region. And I thank you all for your presentations. And my question has to do with, I'm making an assumption from your presentations that your economic development strategies are government supported. you mentioned that they were a part of policy decisions, so I assume they're government supported. So I'm just asking you, all three of you, whether or not you'd confirm that economic development within the rural regions in particular is indeed government funded.
As for Greenland, our economic development potentials are pretty much based on the private capital that we are expecting in the mining business. So we are expecting growth from mainly the private sector when dealing with the oil and mineral exploration. But as for the land-based economy, much of the tourism and trade development is funded by the government. But we aspire to get public and private partnership schemes for the next 3 or 4 years. So we are trying to enhance the partnership schemes in order to generate more private capital for our economic development.
Yes. I guess I can demonstrate that in a couple of ways to answer your question. As I mentioned, there's been an investment plan directly tied to our strategy, and that has allowed investments to be planned long-term in targeted areas, both by the federal government and the territorial government, and then other stakeholders layered in there as either leveraging those funds or supplementing those investments. And also from I guess a political or maybe a policy perspective, it's also supported because we have senior officials from both the territorial government and the federal government involved directly in the Nunavut Economic Forum. So for example, Paul Lucy-Subiga is sitting up front from the Department of Economic Development and Transportation. He's currently president of the forum. And Sylvie Renault, standing at the back of the room, she's the director of operations for Canor for Nunavut, and she's currently vice president of the Nunavut Economic Forum. So we collectively have a lot of support. Thank you.
Yes is basically the answer as well. There's a number of between government departments and then agencies of government. For example, tech is I can compare it to the Newfoundland Labrador Research and Development Corporation. So there are agencies that would support what's happening in economic development in the rural areas, whether directly or indirectly.
We've got time for one more.
Thank you very much. My name is Paz Morales. I work for Canada World Youth. And I wanted to thank you for your presentations, and they were really interesting. And I could see a parallel in all three presentations talking about the importance of education and building human capital. I was wondering if, and I know we have limited time, if you could expand a little bit on that. And my specific question will be really, in your vision or in the vision of the economic development projects that you presented, what will be the ideal blend for education? At Canada World Youth, we have been really working for many years in building the job readiness skills without naming them as such, self-confidence, team building, really wanting to work in different environments, adaptability. But at the end of the day, technical skills or other type of skills are needed. So I would really appreciate if you could talk a little bit about that. Thank you.
Thank you. In Greenland, we are aiming to improve the score of the public school students, first of all. That's our primary goal. But the second most important subject for the government in case of education is, of course, improve the young people's technical education, which is important. Mentioning the lack of or low educational level is based on a large amount of young people coming out from the public school system and gaining no education. We are aiming on concentrating our effort for the young people between 18 and 34 years, and we are aiming to give them a career planning as early as possible and get them to get either a vocational training or a technical education as our objective. We have 3 high schools in Greenland and 9 technical schools besides 1 university. Otherwise, if we are to give the young people a major degree, then we send them for education either in Denmark or the rest of Europe, and some at the McGill University. We are getting more and more young people getting abroad to get a university degree, but the goal is not only to give a university degree for the young people. It's as much a question of giving them vocational training in order to improve their job opportunities later on.
Thank you, Vittus. Did either Craig or Glenn want to have a quick response to that as well? We've got time for one more. If not, that's fine. Okay, so, Glenn, yes, go ahead.
I'll try. I think the focus on youth obviously is sort of a natural, because such a large population of Nunavut are under the age of 24. I think it's 24 is now the median point. But I don't think it's targeted in any specific area. I think it's more an intent to ensure that opportunities can be seized and choices can be made. The focus for education starts with early childhood education, effective daycare programs, into success in K-12, improved graduation results, and then supports for post-secondary education and training, whether that's academic, professional type education, or vocational job-related training. And that's coming from a number of different areas, including the Aboriginal Skills and Employment Training Strategy programs that are delivered by Inuit organizations in Nunavut. In addition, in the past year, there's been additional funding made available through CanNor to deliver adult basic education programs, or to enhance the delivery of adult basic education programs. So I think the efforts in Nunavut really cover the whole range. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. So just before I wind up, I want to thank our conference hosts, Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency and Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada. We do have, I want to thank each of the presenters, and we do have a small gift on behalf of the organizers of the conference for each of the presenters this morning. So that's it for today, this morning here, for this session. So thanks, and give them a big hand, everybody.